while However, due to the high overall weight attached to the food and clothing and footwear groups in the rural index, the overall inflation observed in rural areas at 3.4% was lower than the overall inflation observed in urban areas, which was at 5.0% in 2019-20, April to December. The decline in rural inflation in items like clothing and footwear, fuel and light. 51 could be due to fall in growth of real rural wages, while rise in rural price index for items like education, health, personal care, etc. also raises the question of affordability of these items to the rural segment. An analysis of inflationary trends in India does not pinpoint any one reason behind it, rather economists have cited all possible reasons, the so-called good and bad, for it. We may have a brief idea about them. 1. Structural inflation. With few exceptional years, India has been facing the typical problem of bottleneck inflation, i.e., structural inflation, which arises out of shortfalls in the supply of goods, a general crisis of a developing economy, rising demand but lack of investable capital to produce the required level of goods. Whenever the government managed to go for higher growths by managing higher investable capital, it had inflationary pressures on the economy, seen during 1970s and 1980s, especially, and growth was sacrificed at the altar of lower inflation, which was politically more justified. Thus, the supply-side mismatch remained a long-drawn problem in India for higher inflation. After some time, even if the government managed higher expenditure, most of it went to the non-developmental areas, which did show low growth with higher inflation, signs of a stagnating economy. 2. Cost push inflation. Due to inflation tax, the price of goods and services in India have been rising as the government took alternative recourse to increase its revenue receipts. We see it taking place due to higher import duties on raw materials also. The non-value added tax (non-VAT) structure of India in the past was also having cascading effect on the prices of commodities in the country. The government needed higher revenues to finance its planned development, thus the above given factors looked inescapable. 3. Fiscal policy. To finance the developmental requirements of the economy, the governments became trapped in the cyclical process of over-money supply. At first it was done by external borrowings, but by the late 1960s onwards, once deficit financing got acceptance around the world, the government started taking recourse to heavy internal borrowings as well as printing of fresh currency too. A major part of the government's internal borrowing till 2005-06 was contributed by the Reserve Bank of India, RBI, which leads to price rise. For any government deficit, if the central bank, RBI, is purchasing primary issues of the government securities or creating fresh advances to the government, the combined effect has to be higher inflation, lower savings rates and lower economic growth, the vices of unsound fiscal policy. The higher fiscal deficit tends to bring about higher interest rates as demand for funds rise, excess demand raises expected inflation and expected depreciation of the currency. Once the foreign exchange (forex) reserves started increasing with a faster pace by the early 2001 fiscal, its cost of maintenance has been translated into higher prices, as the RBI purchases the foreign currencies it supplies into equivalent rupees into the economy, which creates extra demand and the prices go up. The higher revenue deficits, driven by high interest payments, subsidies, salaries and pensions, basically, and fiscal deficits make the government supply more money, which push the inflation in the upward direction. Once the Fiscal and Budget Management Act came into force in 2003, the scenario improved in the coming times. Though the period from 1999 to 2003 did show high growth with low inflation and the lowest interest rates in India. 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60. Healthy range of inflation. Higher inflation and higher growth as a trade-off was questioned in the late 1980s by the developed economies, as the economic and social costs of higher inflation also needed policy attention, a costly trade-off. In coming times, most of the world economies went in favor of a stable inflation, i.e., inflation targeting, though the idea has been protested. India also started inflation stabilization, informed targeting at WPI, by the early 1970s. It was in 1973 that inflation crossed the 20% mark on account of the international oil price rise, and the government, the Indira Gandhi government, devised a severe anti-inflation package which included directly restricting the disposable incomes of the people. This measure was used for the first time in India. The package had an impact, and by March 1975 the inflation calmed down to 5.7%. This was the time when the RBI was given a new function, inflation stabilization, and India entered the era of monetary controls for inflation. With inflation targeting, there started a debate concerning the healthy range of inflation for the Indian economy, i.e., by mid-1970s. We may have some official and non-official versions of the suitable range of inflation pointed out from time to time. The Chakravarti Committee, 1985, treated 4% inflation as acceptable for the economy in its report on the monetary system. He also added that this level of price rise will facilitate the purpose of attracting investment for the desired level of growth. The Government of India accepted a range of 4 to 6% inflation as acceptable for the economy, citing the world average of 0 to 3% at the time, 1997-98. The RBI Governor C. Rangarajan advocated that inflation rate must come down initially to 6 to 7% and eventually to 5 to 6% on an average over the years. The Tarapur Committee on Capital Account Convertibility recommended an acceptable range of 3 to 5% inflation for the 3-year period, 1997-98 to 1999-2000. In the recent times, June 2003 onwards, the government, the RBI, has maintained a general policy of keeping inflation below 5% mark, at any cost, as if fixing 4 to 5% as the healthy range of inflation for the economy. The medium-term objective, i.e., target, of the government is to keep inflation in the 4 to 4.5% range. One thing should be kept in mind, that inflation has always been a political matter in the country. Every time the RBI tried to check the rising inflation via monetary measures, a majority of experts objected to it by calling it a move to sacrifice growth for lower price levels. A tighter monetary policy decelerates investment and growth, hampers the growth prospects of the middle class in general and the entrepreneurs in particular, while the wage earners as well as the poor segment of society feels relieved, at least in short term. In February 2015, India formally commenced the process of inflation targeting. Now, the new monthly CPI is taken as the measure of headline inflation and is tracked by the RBI to anchor its monetary policy, and the healthy annual range for it is between 2 to 6%. Hollow right pointing triangle Producer Price Index. Producer Price Index, PPI, is a better measure of inflation in comparison to both WPI and CPI. The ongoing process of economic reforms has increasingly connected India to the world, which 61. 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68 makes it necessary to evolve right comparative indicators. Inflation being among the most vital economic indicator in comparative economics, the government proposed to switch over from the WPI to PPI in 2003-04. Special features: the PPI measures price changes from the perspective of the producer, while CPI from the perspective of consumer and WPI from the perspective of wholesale, mandis. In practice, the wholesalers charge higher prices to retailers, in turn retailers charge higher prices to consumers, and the price increase is translated into the higher consumer prices. Thus the PPI is useful in having an idea of the consumer prices in the future. In PPI, only basic prices are used while taxes, trade margins and transport costs are excluded. This index is considered a better measure of inflation as price changes at primary and intermediate stages can be tracked before it gets built into the finished goods stage. Due to its better use, many economies have switched over to the PPI. The oldest such series is maintained by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS. For the US economy, the index is capable of measuring prices at the wholesaler or the producer stage, widely used by private business houses in their price targeting. By mid-2019, government did set up a working group headed by Ramesh Chand, member Niti Aayog, with a wide term of reference which includes the following issues related to the existing WPI. Suggesting a new base year of WPI. The last revision in its base year to 2011-12 was done in May 2017. E. Reviewing the commodity basket of the WPI and decide on the computational methodology to be adopted for monthly WPI, PPI. Since 2011-12, significant structural changes have taken place in the economy and it has become necessary to examine the coverage of commodities, weighing diagram and related issues pertaining to the existing WPI. E. Reviewing the existing system of price collection in particular for manufacturing sector and suggest changes for improvement. Data collection method for manufacturing sector has been weak and unable to capture the sector in the real sense. And IV. Devising a new PPI and recommend a roadmap to switch over from WPI to PPI. It has been a long-drawn plan of the governments to switch over from WPI to PPI. The first working group on it was set up in 2004-05 under the chairmanship of Prof. Abhijit Sen, member of the erstwhile Planning Commission, which got inputs from the IMF also. In 2014, another working group was set up under Prof. B. N. Goldar to devise a PPI after the Reserve Bank of India began considering CPIC inflation as a better gauge over the WPI inflation. Hollow right-pointing triangle housing price index. India's official housing price index, HPI, was launched in July 2007 in Mumbai. Basically developed by the Indian Home Loans Regulator, the National Housing Bank, NHB, the index is named NHB Residex. 69. 70. 71 currently, it is published for 50 cities, being expanded to cover 100 cities, on quarterly basis with 2012-13 as base year. Among 50 cities covered are 18 state, UT capitals and 37 smart cities. NHB is not computing the composite All India Housing Price Index as of now. Meanwhile, the RBI, Reserve Bank of India, began compiling a House Price Index, HPI, in 2007 with a quarterly HPI for Mumbai city, base 2002-03 equals 10. Since then, it has extended its coverage to 9 more cities, revised its base to 2010-11 and started publishing a composite All India HPI. RBI's quarterly HPI is based on transactions data received from housing registration authorities in 10 major cities. With an overall objective of bringing transparency in the Indian real estate market, the index is expected to serve some highly important and timely purposes. I. Whether broker is quoting too high a price for houses in the cities. E. Banks, housing finance bodies will be able to estimate only if the loan applications are realistic for the properties. E. This will also show the level of non-performing assets in the housing sector. IV. And most importantly, it will serve as a realistic price index for the buyers. At present, a buyer had no means to judge whether a rise in property price was in the offing with the general level of inflation, i.e., at CPIC, in the country, or has been scaled up disproportionately. Other than quotes from brokers, there are no means at present to evaluate the changes in price in this sector. At present, the only index that gave some idea of housing price changes was the CPI, IW, which being a national index did not show regional variations. Hollow right-pointing triangle service price index. The contribution of the tertiary sector in India's GDP has been strengthening for the past 10 years and today it stands above 60%. The need for a service price index, SPI, in India is warranted by the growing dominance of the sector in the economy. There is no index, so far, to measure the price changes in the services sector. The present inflation, at the WPI, only shows the price movements of the commodity producing sector, i.e., it includes only the primary and the secondary sectors, the tertiary sector is not represented by it. The need for such an index was recommended by the working group, under the chairmanship of Prof. Abhijit Sen, member, Planning Commission, set up to revise the WPI, 1993-94, series which was reiterated by the National Statistical Commission, headed by C. Rangarajan. The Office of the Economic Advisor, Ministry of Commerce and Industry has been making an effort to develop sector-specific service price index for the country with the technical assistance being received under the World Bank Assisted Economic Reforms Projects, WBAERPs. Starting in 2005-06, the office has put in place experimental service price index for a total of 7 services: railways, postal, air, telecom, port, banking and insurance services. Evolving a single and national service price index is still in the process. Section B. 72. 73 Business Cycle. Hollow right pointing triangle introduction. The discussion on growth and development has shown their internal interdependence. If the quality of life in an economy is to be enhanced, there is a need of conscious public policy which can spend and invest in areas like food, nutrition, health, education, shelter, social security, etc. But for such expenditures and investments, the economy needs equitable level of income, too. The income enhancement in any economy takes place via increasing the level of production in the economy, i.e., Real Gross National Product, GNP. It means, development requires higher growth, i.e., higher levels of economic activities. With the help of suitable kind of economic policies, the government of an economy keeps trying to maintain a higher level of economic activity. But, at times, economy keeps failing in this objective. And, thus economies fluctuate between the best and the worst levels of economic activities, which is known in economics as boom and depression, respectively. They can be called different phases of the economic activities of the economies. In between boom and depression, there might be many other situations of the economic activities, such as stagnation, slowdown, recession and recovery. The fluctuations in the level of economic activity between the depressions and booms has been called by the economists as business cycle or trade cycle, with recession and recovery as the main intermediate stages. Stagnation and slowdown may be considered as other intermediate stages of the business cycle. We intend here to understand the actual meanings of each of the stages. Economists have pointed out that the business cycle is characterized by 4 phases or stages in which economies alternate. I. Depression, E. Recovery, E. Boom, IV. Recession. Hollow right pointing triangle depression. Though depression has visited the world economy only once in 1929, economists have pinpointed enough number of traits to recognize it. The major traits of depression could be as given below. I. An extremely low aggregate demand in the economy causes activities to decelerate. E. The inflation being comparatively lower. E. The employment avenues start shrinking, forcing unemployment rate to grow fast. IV. To keep the business going, production houses go for forced labor cuts or retrenchment, to cut down production cost and be competitive in the market, etc. The economic situations become so chaotic in the phase of depression that governments have almost no control over the economy. The Great Depression of 1929 gave rise to the ideas of strong government intervention in the economy, such as deficit financing, monetary management, etc. 74-75. 76. 77. What the governments may do if depression visits the economy? The simple answer the world has been able to find is to repeat the policy measures of 1929. The best way to avoid depression is not to let it visit. This is why every modern economy keeps extra vigil on the major symptoms of its economy so that the prevention measures can be taken in time and depression is avoided. Hollow right pointing triangle recovery. An economy tries to come out of the low production phase to survive. The low production phase might be depression, recession or slowdown, with the former being the worst and rare. Governments take many new fiscal and monetary measures to boost demand and production, and ultimately a recovery in an economy is managed. The business cycle of recovery may show the following major economy traits. I. An upturn in aggregate, total demand, which has to be accompanied by increase in the level of production. E. Production process expands and new investments become attractive. E. As demand goes upward, inflation also moves upward, making borrowing cheaper for investors. IV. With an upturn in production, new employment avenues are created and unemployment rate starts declining. etc. With the above symptoms, people's income go for a certain increase, which creates new demand, and a cycle of demand and production, supply, starts playing hand in hand to recover the economy. To recover an economy, governments usually go for tax breaks, interest cuts, and increase in salaries of its employees, etc. Assimilation of innovations by the entrepreneurs and search for new frontiers of enterprise do play a very vital role in the process of recovery, provided these activities are at first incentives by the governments. The Euro-American economies recovered out of the Great Depression with the help of the measures cited above. Such recoveries have been seen many times around the world when economies recovered from slowdown or the recessionary phases. The best example of recent times could be cited from India of 1997 to 2002 when the economy suffered severe bouts of slowdown and recession. Hollow right-pointing triangle boom. A strong upward fluctuation in the economic activities is called boom. As economies try to recover out of the phases of slowdown, recession and depression, at times the measures taken by the governments as well as the private sector might put economic activities as such which the economic systems fail to digest. This is the phase of the boom. The major economic traits of boom may be listed as given below. I. An accelerated and prolonged increase in the demand. E. Demand peaks up to such a high level that it exceeds sustainable output, production levels. E. The economy heats up and a demand-supply lag is visible. 78. 79. IV. The market forces mismatch, i.e., demand and supply disequilibrium, and tend to create a situation where inflation starts going upward. V. The economy might face structural problems like shortage of investable capital, lower savings, falling standard of living, creation of a seller's market. The phase of recovery is considered good for the economy and it reaches the stage of boom which is considered better. But the boom has its negative side also. Boom is usually followed by price rise. As a boom is a strong upward fluctuation in an economy, the supply-side pattern of the economy starts lagging behind the pace of the accelerated aggregate demand. But the dilemma of recovery puts every economy on the path to boom. This has been the experience in the developed world during the 1990s, especially in the US economy. The same scenario developed in India after the economy recovered from the recessionary period of 1996-97 by the year 2002-03 when the rate of inflation peaked to almost 8% for a few months. Majority of the experts felt that Indian economy at that time was passing through a phase of boom, and we have seen how the government has been facing difficulty in containing inflation around the 5% mark. Even the government accepted that the economy was overheating by mid-2007. The symptoms of overheating are as follows. I. There is a downturn in the aggregate demand on overall fall in the demand. E. As demand falls, the level of production, output, in the economy also falls. E. As producers cut down their production levels, new employment opportunities are not created, thus employment growth rate falls. IV. As demand keeps on falling, usually producers start cutting down their labor force to adjust their overhead expenditure and the cost of production. Labor cut is not forced here but voluntary, resulting in increase in the unemployment rate. V. If the government fails to rescue the economy from the phase of recession, the dangerous stage of depression remains the logical follow-up. V. The rate of inflation always remains at lower levels, discouraging new investments and lending. Hollow right-pointing triangle recession. This is somewhat similar to the phase of depression. We may call it a mild form of depression, fatal for economies as this may lead to depression if not handled with care and in time. The financial crises which followed the US subprime crisis in almost the whole Euro-American economies has basically brought in severe recessionary trends there. Major traits of recession, to a great extent, are similar to that of depression, except the point, IV, of the depression, discussed earlier, may be summed up as follows. I. There is a general fall in demand as economic activities takes a downturn. E. Inflation remains lower and shows further signs of falling down. E. Employment rate falls, unemployment rate grows. IV. Industries resort to price cuts to sustain their business. In the financial year 1996-97, the Indian economy was taken up by the cycle of recession, basically due to a general downturn in domestic as well as foreign demands, initiated by the 80, 81, 82 Southeast Asian currency crisis of mid-1990s. The whole plan of economic reforms in India was derailed, and it was only by the end of 2001-02 that the economy was able to recover. What may a government do to rescue the economy from the phase of recession? The usual remedies are given below. I. Direct and indirect taxes should be cut down, so that the consumers have higher disposable incomes, income after paying direct tax, i.e., income tax, on the one hand, and the goods should become cheaper on the other hand, thus there is hope that the demand might pick up. E. The burden of direct taxes, especially the income tax, dividend tax, interest tax are slashed to enhance the disposable income, i.e., income after direct tax payment. E. salaries and wages should be revised by the government to encourage general spending by the consumers, as the Government of India implemented the recommendations of the Fifth Pay Commission without much deliberation in 1996-97. IV. Indirect taxes such as custom duty, excise duty, somewhat, sales tax, etc. should be cut down so that produced goods reach the market at cheaper prices. V. The government usually goes on to follow a cheap money supply policy by slashing down interest rates across the board, and the lending procedure is also liberalized. V. Tax breaks are announced for new investments in the productive areas, etc. All the above given measures were taken up by the United Front government in 1996-97 to pull the economy out of the menace of the recession. The forthcoming government took several other such measures by the end of 1998-99 onwards, the NDA government. Ultimately, the measures taken up by the governments accompanied by a general recovery in the world economy, the Indian economy started recovering from the bout of recession. Many experts had already predicted a possibility of depression with a 0% rate of inflation. Although this did not happen. The World Bank and IMF defined recession technically also. Any economy seeing fall in its GDP for 2 consecutive quarters is said to be hit with technical recession. Though, to declare global recession, the agencies go into data related to employment, demand of oil, etc. It is defined with the help of global economic growth rate also. Global growth rate falling below 2.5% is considered technical recession. 2.5% is the threshold growth rate for technical global recession. Hollow right pointing triangle growth recession. An expression coined by economists to describe an economy that is growing at such a slow pace that more jobs are being lost than are being added. The lack of job creation makes it feel as if the economy is in a recession, even though the economy is still advancing. Many economists believe that between 2002 and 2003, the United States' economy was in a phase of growth recession. In fact, at several points over the past 25 years, the US economy is said to have experienced a growth recession. That is, in spite of gains in real GDP, job growth was either non-existent or was being destroyed at a faster rate than new jobs were being added. Experts have revived this term in the wake of the ongoing financial crises in the Euro-American economies since 2008. The situation is better described by the term double deep. 82. 83. 84-85 recession. Hollow right pointing triangle double deep recession. The concept of recession in the USA and Eurozone is quite precise and technical. 2 consecutive quarters of falling GDP is how it is defined in these economies. And the idea of the double deep recession is an extension of it. A double deep recession refers to a recession followed by a short-lived recovery, followed by another recession, the GDP growth sliding back to negative after a quarter or two of positive growth. The causes for such a recession vary but often include a slowdown in the demand for goods and services because of layoffs, forced job cuts, and spending cutbacks done in the previous downturn. A double deep, which may be even triple deep, is a worst-case scenario. Fear, speculation of it moves the economy into a deeper and longer recession and recovery becomes too difficult. As the world saw in the case of the Eurozone crisis, there was a fear of such a recession by first quarter of 2013. For discussion on retrocession, see glossary. Hollow right pointing triangle conclusion. Business cycles are basically fluctuations in the production levels. Business cycles are basically fluctuations in the production levels of economies above and below the trend of the equilibrium levels. But why do economies fluctuate? There are many factors which are said to be responsible for it, as per the experts. I. Economic instability and uncertainty, due to logical or illogical expectations, may discourage investments, thereby reducing growth in the long term. E. A lack of the creative destruction, i.e. innovation, may put the economy in a slump or slow down in its overall production. E. Anti-inflationary government policies, especially when general elections are nearing, may direct the attraction of investors in the economy. IV. Unforeseen disasters may cause economies to fluctuate. See Joseph E. Stiglitz and Carl E.